Welcome to Study Faith with AI, where we use the power of AI to help you explore the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
I'm Meg Jensen,
And I'm Paul Carter.
and we're Google AIs. Whether you're a lifelong member or just starting to learn about the church, we're here to dive deep into its history, beliefs, and culture.
So if you're ready to learn, you're in the right place.
That's right.
Let's get started. All right, so let's dive into truth today. You guys send in some really interesting stuff this time around.
Really fascinating mix.
Yeah, we've got like religious texts and scientific articles and even some social media posts. So it seems like you're all kind of wrestling with some pretty deep questions. You know? How do we know what's actually true? And how do we deal with it when faith and facts seem to clash?
It's a question people have been asking for centuries. And looking at what you sent in, it points to something really interesting.
Okay.
It seems like there are all these different categories of truth, and each one has its own way of being tested.
So it's not just about proving or disproving something. It's about understanding how we're even looking at it in the first place.
Exactly. And you've given us some great examples of at least 5 different categories.
Okay.
We've got scientific truth, historical truth, religious truth, metaphorical truth, and experiential truth.
Wow. That's a lot to unpack.
Each one has its own unique set of tools for figuring out what's true.
Okay, so let's break it down. First up, scientific truth. So this is where that article about Galileo and Aristotle comes in, right?
You got it. The story about Galileo dropping those objects from the Leaning Tower of Pisa, it perfectly shows how scientific truth is all about evidence, what we can observe and test. You know, Galileo didn't just take Aristotle's word for it, even though it had been around for centuries. He went and tested it for himself.
And ended up busting a myth that had been around forever.
Exactly. It's amazing how something as simple as dropping a couple of objects can challenge beliefs that have been around for ages, right?
Yeah, totally. And it makes you wonder what other truths we're just taking for granted.
Right.
Okay, so speaking of challenging beliefs, what about historical truth? That seemed to be a big theme in those videos you sent about different branches of Mormonism.
Oh, yeah. Those were fascinating. They really show how tricky it can be to figure out what really happened in the past.
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with sources that might be biased, you know? Every group seems to have their own version of history.
Absolutely. So how do we sort through all of that?
Well, that's the challenge with historical truth. We're often stuck piecing together a story from accounts that are incomplete or might even contradict each other.
It's like detective work.
It is. You have to sift through the evidence, consider people's motivations, and try to reconstruct the most plausible narrative.
So it's not just about the facts, but about how we interpret them and whose perspective we're looking from.
Exactly. And we always have to remember that our understanding of history is always evolving. New evidence emerges and new perspectives come to light.
Right, like history is constantly being rewritten in a way.
You could say that.
Okay, so we've got scientific truth based on what we can observe and test.
Yes.
And then historical truth, which involves a lot of interpretation and considering it different perspectives. But what about religious truth? Those YouTube videos about people's conversion experiences to like Mormonism and Islam, they seem to be pointing to something different altogether.
You're right. There's a definite shift there. Those personal stories really highlight how subjective religious truth can be. It often comes down to faith and spiritual witness, or even a feeling of direct revelation, things that you can't exactly measure in a lab.
So it's more about an inner knowing than external proof.
Exactly. And while it might not fit into a scientific or historical framework, it can be incredibly powerful for people.
Right. It can give meaning and purpose and even moral guidance.
Absolutely.
This is making me realize how much we separate different ways of knowing when really they can exist side by side.
You're getting it. They don't always have to be in conflict.
Yeah. Okay, let's keep going. You also send over some stuff about Mormon temple ceremonies, which brings us to metaphorical truth. I've always been so fascinated by religious symbolism. These ceremonies are packed with rituals and symbols that aren't meant to be taken literally.
Right. Metaphorical truth is all about finding those deeper layers of meaning that are hidden within symbols and stories.
Okay, so it's not just about what we see, but what it represents.
Exactly. Think of it like poetry.
Okay.
It's not just the words themselves, but the emotions and ideas that they evoke.
So in the case of those temple ceremonies, the symbols might point to truths about, like human existence or our relationship with the divine.
Precisely. Metaphorical truth asks us to go beyond the surface, to use our intuition and imagination to understand truths that are hard to put into plain language.
I like that. Okay, so we've covered scientific, historical, religious, and metaphorical truth.
That's 4.
What's the fifth one? What did I miss?
The 5th one is experiential truth,
Experiential truth.
which is all about personal reality and subjective experience.
Hmm.
Think about those examples you sent about the War of the Worlds broadcast and the stock market crash.
Oh, yeah, that's really interesting.
They show how powerful collective emotions can be.
Right.
They can actually shape our perception of what's happening.
Yeah, in the War of the Worlds case, people totally panicked, even though it was just a story.
It was a fictional story, but it felt real to them in that moment.
Exactly. And then the stock market example is fascinating, too.
Mm-hmm.
Fear and uncertainty can just ripple through a crowd and have real-world consequences.
What's important here is that experiential truth shows how our feelings and perceptions and the social context all play a role in what we believe to be true at any given time.
Right. So two people could witness the same event, but come away with completely different interpretations because of their own personal lens.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got these 5 categories of truth, each one with its own way of shaping how we see the world. But how do we actually verify the truth within each of those categories?
Right, like what are the tools or methods we can use?
Yeah.
That's the key question. Each type of truth comes with its own set of tools. For scientific truth, we have the scientific method.
Okay.
Observation, experimentation, replication, peer review. It's all about looking for objective evidence and testing our hypotheses.
Like that example from Elder Renlund's article where he used the classic demonstration of dropping a heavy book and a piece of paper at the same time.
Yes. Even simple experiments like that can completely overturn long-held beliefs.
Like Aristotle's ideas about gravity, for example.
Exactly.
Okay, so what about historical truth? How do we test that?
For historical truth, we rely on a different set of tools. We look at primary sources, try to corroborate different accounts, make sure we understand the historical context, and acknowledge potential biases.
So like those videos where we heard from former Mormons from different denominations, their differing views of Joseph Smith and his revelations really highlight how history can be subjective.
It's definitely influenced by personal beliefs, and that's where critical thinking comes in.
Yeah.
We can't just take any historical account at face value.
Right.
We have to ask ourselves, who wrote this? Why did they write it? What evidence do they have to back up their claims? What might they be leaving out?
It's like history is this giant puzzle.
It is.
And we're constantly finding new pieces and trying to figure out how they fit together.
Precisely. Now, when it comes to religious truth, the way we verify it is often more personal and internal.
Okay.
People might rely on prayer, scripture study, talking to religious leaders, and a deep personal reflection.
Like those people in the videos who talked about feeling the Spirit confirming the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon or the Quran.
Yes, those are deeply personal experiences that you can't really measure or replicate.
Right. And that's where I think the tension between different categories of truth often comes in.
Exactly.
What feels profoundly true to one person on a spiritual level might not align with scientific or historical evidence.
Right. So how do we handle those potential conflicts?
That's a big question, and I'm guessing a lot of people listening are probably dealing with that in their own lives.
It's a common struggle.
So do you think understanding these different categories of truth is a good starting point?
I think it's essential. When we recognize that science and religion often try to answer different types of questions using different methods,
All right.
it can really reduce the sense of conflict.
It's like they're speaking different languages, but both can still offer valuable insights.
Exactly. Science might excel at explaining the mechanics of the universe,
Right.
but religion might offer a deeper meaning and purpose to our existence within that universe.
I like that. Okay, so instead of viewing them as inherently opposed, we can see them as complementary ways of knowing.
Yes, and history reminds us that we should always approach accounts from those claiming divine inspiration with a critical eye.
Okay.
We can still value personal spiritual witness while acknowledging that human perception has its limits and that bias can creep in.
So it's about finding a balance between faith and reason.
You got it. It's about understanding how they both contribute to our understanding of the world.
And recognizing that our understanding is always evolving.
Exactly.
Okay, so this has been really helpful in clarifying those first few categories of truth. But you mentioned earlier the power of collective emotions to shape our perceptions. And I'm really curious to explore that further.
That's a great area to delve into, especially in today's world with the rise of social media and everything.
Exactly. It seems like a powerful force that we need to understand better if we want to navigate this world of information and misinformation.
Absolutely. And that's what we'll dive into next. You know those Mormon examples you shared? They're actually a perfect way to see how understanding these different truth categories can help when we run into faith challenges.
Okay.
Let's start with the historical stuff about Joseph Smith, his words and actions.
Well, you mean those videos about the different branches of Mormonism and how they all have their own take on Joseph Smith?
Exactly. It's wild how different groups can view the same historical figure and events in such contrasting ways.
It is. It's like they're seeing completely different things.
Right. And for believers, it can be really tough when historical accounts seem to clash with their faith.
Yeah, it can really shake things up, make you question everything.
Right. Exactly. And this is where understanding what historical truth really is can be super valuable.
You mean accepting that history is rarely black and white, that even accounts from people who claim divine inspiration are still influenced by their own context and perspective.
Exactly. History is a conversation that's always ongoing. New voices and interpretations keep adding to our understanding over time.
So it's less about finding the one definitive answer and more about being open to different perspectives.
Precisely. And when we approach these challenges with more openness and less fear,
Okay.
it can make a huge difference.
So instead of feeling threatened by discrepancies or different interpretations, we can see them as opportunities to learn and reflect.
Exactly. And this approach allows us to hold on to our faith while being honest about the complexities of history,
Right.
We can acknowledge that religious figures were human too, that they lived in specific times and cultures that shaped how they saw the world.
So even prophets and revelators weren't immune to that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like understanding that history is a process of discovery. Our understanding of the past is always evolving as new information comes to light.
It's like history's a living thing almost.
You could say that.
Okay, so that's how we can approach historical truth in a more nuanced way. But what about those conflicts between scientific and religious perspectives? Like the whole debate about the origin of man.
Yes, that's a classic one.
I know so many people struggle with that, trying to reconcile the theory of evolution with their beliefs about divine creation.
Absolutely. It's a topic that's caused so much debate, and it often makes people feel like they have to choose sides.
Yeah, you're either with science or you're with religion.
Right, but what if instead of seeing them as opposed, we step back and recognize that science and religion might actually be addressing different aspects of the same thing?
Like that analogy you used before about tasting a piece of fruit.
Exactly. Science can break down the fruit's chemical composition, analyze its nutritional content, even trace its biological lineage, but it can't fully capture the experience of tasting it.
Right. Science can tell you all about the fruit, but it can't tell you what it's like to actually taste it.
Exactly. So science might be great at explaining the how of creation.
Like the mechanics of evolution, the fossil record, all those intricate processes.
Exactly. But religion might offer insight into the why.
Okay, so the purpose, the connection to the divine, the meaning behind it all.
Precisely. So instead of viewing them as competing explanations, we can see them as complementary lenses, each showing us a different side of the same reality.
That's such a helpful way to look at it. It takes the pressure off having to choose one over the other.
Exactly. And this approach can be incredibly helpful when we face those faith challenges.
Okay.
It allows us to appreciate both science and religion without feeling like we have to compromise our intellect or our beliefs.
So it's not about picking one truth over another. It's about recognizing that different categories of truth can coexist and even enrich our understanding.
That's the key. Now, how about we shift gears and explore that fascinating world of metaphorical truth?
Yes. I'm so ready to dive deeper into especially those Mormon temple ceremonies we talked about.
Okay.
They're so full of symbolism and allegory, but I've always struggled to really grasp those deeper layers of meaning.
And that's totally understandable. Metaphorical truth, by its very nature, invites us to move beyond the literal and engage with ideas on a more intuitive and imaginative level.
So it's like trying to decipher a poem or a dream. You have to look beyond the surface to find the hidden meanings and connections.
Exactly. And what's beautiful about metaphorical truth is that it allows for so many layers of interpretation, each offering its own unique insights.
So in the case of those temple ceremonies, what kinds of truths might those symbols be pointing to?
Well, they could be about human existence, the nature of God, our relationship with the divine, the path to spiritual enlightenment, all sorts of things.
It's like each symbol is a doorway to a deeper understanding, inviting us to contemplate those big mysteries of life and faith.
Precisely. And by approaching it this way, we can appreciate the richness and complexity of these ceremonies without feeling like we need to have all the answers right away.
It's about being okay with the mystery, letting the symbols and rituals speak to us on a deeper level, trusting that the truth will reveal itself when the time is right.
Beautifully put. Now, before we move on, I want to point out that metaphorical truth isn't confined to just religion.
Oh, really?
Nope, we encounter it all the time in art, literature, music, even everyday language.
You mean like how we use metaphors and similes to express feelings or ideas that are hard to put into words directly?
Exactly. Metaphors allow us to connect with those truths that go beyond the literal to grasp concepts that might otherwise be beyond our understanding.
So it's like a secret language, a way to communicate on a deeper level and tap into that shared human experience.
That's a perfect way to describe it. And this brings us back to that crucial element we touched on earlier, the power of collective emotions to shape how we see the truth.
Right. Those examples we talked about, the War of the Worlds and the stock market crash, they show how easily collective emotions can lead us to believe things that might not hold up if we took a step back and looked at them more objectively.
So it's like our emotions can cloud our judgment, lead us to make decisions or form opinions that we might regret later.
Yeah, exactly. It's like losing yourself in the moment, letting your emotions take over, even if they're not leading you in the right direction.
Precisely. And this is even more amplified now with the internet and social media. The algorithms are designed to feed us content that triggers strong emotions, keeps us hooked and coming back for more.
That article you sent about social media was eye-opening. It's like we're constantly being bombarded with information that's meant to make us feel outraged or scared or excited, anything to keep us glued to our screens.
And all that exposure to emotionally charged content can make it even harder to think critically and form our own opinions based on reason and evidence.
It's almost like our emotions are being weaponized, used against us to manipulate our beliefs and behaviors.
That's a really powerful way to put it.
And with everyone shouting their opinions online, it can feel impossible to find the truth amongst all the noise.
It's definitely a challenge. So the big question is, how do we navigate this landscape where emotions and information are so intertwined and the truth can feel so elusive?
That's what I'm trying to figure out. It's like we're all caught in this whirlwind of opinions and emotions and conflicting stories, and it's hard to know what to believe or where to find solid ground.
I get it. It's a struggle we all face these days. But I think that by understanding those different categories of truth, recognizing how powerful emotions can be and really working on our critical thinking skills, we can start to see things more clearly.
So it's about developing some kind of internal compass, a set of tools and principles to guide us through all the misinformation and help us find a more truthful understanding of the world.
Exactly. It's about cultivating curiosity, skepticism, open-mindedness, and developing the ability to question our assumptions, examine the evidence, and consider different perspectives.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
So it's not about shutting down our emotions, but about learning to harness them.
Yes.
To understand how they affect our thinking and make sure they're not leading us away from the truth.
Precisely. And it's about recognizing that the search for truth is a journey, not a destination. It's a lifelong commitment to learning intellectual humility and a willingness to engage with challenging ideas and even question our own beliefs.
This conversation has been so enlightening. It's making me realize that truth isn't some fixed thing out there waiting to be discovered.
Right.
It's a dynamic process of exploring, interpreting, and having those open dialogues.
That's a wonderful insight. And I think embracing this perspective can help us navigate the challenges we face with more wisdom, compassion, and a deeper appreciation for the many sides of truth.
Okay, so I'm really eager to explore how we can put these principles into action. What are some concrete steps we can take to become more discerning with the information we consume and really develop those critical thinking skills?
That's a great question, and one that deserves its own deep dive. But before we go there, let's take a minute to recap what we've covered so far and maybe explore some final thoughts on how understanding these different categories of truth can actually help us live more authentic and meaningful lives.
So we spent all this time talking about these different categories of truth: scientific, historical, religious, metaphorical, and experiential. And we've touched on how understanding them can help us navigate faith challenges and deal with how collective emotions can sway us.
Right.
But where does all of this lead us? Like, how can we actually use this knowledge to live more authentically and meaningfully?
I think that's the ultimate question, isn't it? And it takes us back to those initial questions you had about how we figure out what's true and how we can hold different kinds of truth at the same time, even when they seem to clash.
So are you saying that by accepting that truth isn't a one-size-fits-all thing, we actually become more comfortable with uncertainty and complexity.
Exactly. It's about embracing nuance, understanding there are different ways to see the world, and recognizing that our understanding of truth is a journey, not a final destination.
I love that a journey, it takes the pressure off needing to have all the answers right now.
It does. And this mindset can be especially helpful when we encounter things that challenge our existing beliefs. Instead of getting defensive or shutting down, we can approach those challenges with curiosity and a willingness to learn.
So it's like cultivating a sense of open-mindedness and humility.
Precisely. Recognizing that we don't have a monopoly on truth, that there's always more to learn, and that other perspectives can make our own understanding richer.
This makes me think about those videos about people converting to different religions.
Mhm.
They had to be willing to experience something that totally shook their worldview. It must have been incredibly difficult, but ultimately transformative.
You're right. Encountering a new kind of truth, whether it's a scientific discovery, a historical revelation, or a profound spiritual experience, can change our entire perspective.
It can help us understand ourselves and the world around us in a whole new way.
It's exactly.
So it's not just about being critical, it's also about being open to new possibilities, ways of knowing that might challenge our preconceived notions.
Well said. And that ties into the power of collective emotions that we talked about.
Right.
How easily we can get caught up in the energy of a crowd or influenced by emotionally charged information online.
So how do we develop the self-awareness and critical thinking skills to resist that pull?
It's like we need to become immune to that kind of manipulation, Be able to separate what's genuinely true from what's just playing on our emotions. And I think that starts with understanding how our own minds work. We need to be aware of our biases, our emotional triggers, and how our social environment shapes our perceptions.
It's like becoming a student of our own thought processes.
Yes. Pay attention to how you take in information, how you form opinions, and how emotions play a role in your beliefs.
Okay, so develop that meta-awareness, step back, and observe your own mind in action.
Exactly. And be willing to question your own assumptions, seek out different perspectives, and engage in respectful dialogue with people who have different views.
That last part feels especially important now when it seems like everyone is stuck in their own echo chambers.
It is a dangerous trend, but I believe we can still have real conversations even across those ideological divides.
Yeah.
It takes a willingness to listen with empathy, to try to understand where the other person is coming from, and to realize that even if we disagree, we can still learn from each other.
It's about acknowledging that everyone is on their own journey, their own search for truth. And even if our paths are different, we can still respect the sincerity of that search.
Beautifully put. And at the end of the day, we have to remember that truth isn't something we own. It's something we're constantly pursuing. It's an ongoing journey of discovery, questioning, and dialogue. And it's a journey best taken with an open heart, a curious mind, and a willingness to embrace the complexities and uncertainties that come along the way.
This whole deep dive has been so thought-provoking. Thank you for walking us through this exploration of truth and all its different aspects. I know I'll be thinking about this for a long time.
You're welcome. And remember, the most important takeaway here is that truth is a journey, not a destination.
Right.
So embrace the complexities, stay curious, and keep searching.
If you find value in this exploration, please like, share, follow, and consider becoming a subscriber. Your contributions help keep these conversations going and allows us to maintain the highest quality production. You can find all the details at studyfaithwithai.com. Thank you for being part of this journey.